Hello and welcome to my channel. In this one I'm going to do a charcoal drawing of this mountain slope, but the slope in the foreground will be in the shadow, so it's a little bit different. It should be interesting. Now the first thing I'm doing is using a graphite pencil to draw the shape of some of these mountains. So we're going to have a slope here in the foreground and some mountains in the background. After that I'm switching to charcoal, and the first thing that I'm going to use is vine charcoal. Actually, vine charcoal is going to be my main drawing tool in this one, and its advantage is that it can be modified very easily. The amount of value can be modified very easily, but you can also cover large areas very quickly and easily. So these are the two great advantages when using vine charcoal. In addition to vine charcoal, I'm also going to use a medium charcoal pencil, but I'm going to get to that later. You'll have a list of my materials in the description, as well as the reference photo. The reference photo will also be there. Now I'm blending this with a paper tissue. I want to blend this smoothly, so this darker area here is the sky and the lighter shapes are the clouds. So basically I shaded the sky and I left the portion of the paper where the clouds will be lighter, almost completely white. And now I'm going to refine the shape of the clouds using a precision eraser. This is a Tombow Mono Zero eraser. This is like a rubber eraser in a mechanical pencil, and it allows you to draw some smaller, lighter shapes and finer lines. So I'm using it here to draw some smaller shapes of clouds and to make the overall shape of my clouds, which are looming on the horizon, to make them look a bit more complex and detailed. I'm not going to leave these shapes completely white. I'm also doing a little bit of cleaning up with a kneaded eraser. I like to use a combination of a kneaded eraser and a precision eraser. So I'm not going to leave these shapes of the clouds completely white. I'm going to add some shadow areas here and there, because clouds are three-dimensional objects, so they're going to have their shadow sides or shadow shapes and lighter shapes. So I'm adding some of those shadow areas with just a touch of vine charcoal and then some light blending with a soft brush. I mostly use flat brushes because it's easier for me to work on the details that way. So I'm doing a little bit more additional cleaning up and allowing some of these lighter parts of the clouds to stand out against the darker shapes. So I think now we have something that looks like a group of clouds over the horizon. And we have a nice contrast between the clouds and the sky. Now I'm going to move on to the ground, to the land. I'm going to draw some mountains here. The mountains here in the distance are interesting. First of all, they're going to be of lighter value than the mountain slope in the foreground. The mountain slope in the foreground is in the shadow. We're seeing this, the shadow side of that foreground mountain. I'm going to get to that one a little bit later, but if you check out the reference photo, you will see that the mountain slope in the foreground is much darker than the mountains that I'm drawing now. So these mountain peaks that I'm drawing are well lit by the sun, by the light source, which is why they appear so much lighter. In addition to that, they also appear fairly detailed. Normally, the stuff that is further away will tend to get blurrier and less defined because of the atmospheric effect. But sometimes, depending on the atmospheric conditions and the lighting, the mountains in the background can appear very detailed. This is one of those cases, which is why I put a little bit more texture and a little bit more detail into these mountains. I'm even drawing some of these small trees or groups of trees on the slopes of those mountains. They are rocky and bare for the most part, but as you can see, here and there we have some coniferous trees. Not very dense, and I'm not really going to try to reproduce the exact look of these shapes as they are in the reference, but I'm going to throw in a few of those groups of trees just to make these mountains a little bit more interesting. So as you can see, I'm doing all of this with a charcoal pencil now. I'm only going to use a medium charcoal pencil. I prefer these Master's Touch woodless charcoal pencils. I either use these or the Kohinoor charcoal pencils, and I usually use the medium grade for most of the work. Sometimes I use the soft one as well. And now I'm going to draw some trees on the slope here. It's like a coniferous tree that's kind of bare for the most part. Not too many branches and not too much foliage on it. But it's a nice shape, it's a nice detail, because what it does, it pushes those mountains further back. It creates a feeling of depth and distance. This is one of those things that happens when you start stacking elements in a landscape, one on top of the other. When you add foreground elements or midground elements, they start pushing the background elements further back, as it were, making them appear like they're further and further away. Now I'm going to shade this entire slope using a piece of vine charcoal. So once again, the two main reasons why I'm using vine charcoal for this is because first I can cover this very, very quickly, establishing a large area of darker value. And the second reason is once I blend it, and I'm going to blend this thing with my finger, once I blend it and once I apply the vine charcoal, I can actually modify the amount of value very, very easily. I can take away or add value as needed. And here I'm going to do just that, because I'm going to draw a bunch of lighter shapes and darker shapes on this mountain slope. And I'm going to use an interesting technique that a lot of people don't really use when working in charcoal. I'm going to be lifting up charcoal with a brush. So rather than using an eraser, but I will use an eraser, as you can see, every now and then, I will also use a brush like this. Just dab on some parts of these areas which are covered with vine charcoal and make them lighter by dabbing on them with a clean brush. So every now and then I will clean the tip of my brush, and I will go back in and basically lift up or move a little bit of charcoal, creating some lighter shapes. And if I feel like I need to make the shape a little bit lighter or clean up the edge of the shape, I can always do that with an eraser, either a Tombow Mono Zero eraser or a kneaded eraser. That can create some additional contrast, and that can give me some cleaner edges. But for the most part, I will be using this lifting up technique, and I'm going to use a lot more of it a bit later. Right now I'm drawing another tree here at the top of that slope. This one is getting a little bit closer to a viewpoint, so I'm going to try to make it a bit more detailed. I'm putting a little bit more effort into drawing the shape of the tree trunk, as well as the branches and the clusters of needles. These are all coniferous trees apparently. So a little bit of shadow under it. So now we have a darker shape here, there, which stands out very nicely against the lighter value of the sky. So very nice contrast there, which is why I liked the reference photo in the first place. So now I'm going to refine the appearance and the shape of these rocks by using a charcoal pencil. You can see that I already had a lighter shape which I created by lifting up and using an eraser, and now I'm drawing some darker shapes by using a charcoal pencil. I drew the shadow area on the side and some smaller shapes like cracks or dips in that rock, so that it looks like a rough, uneven shape. And you can see that these shapes are starting to look a lot more like rocks now. This whole slope in the foreground will be covered, it's kind of rocky. It's going to be covered with a lot of these stones and rocks, as well as a few trees here and there. So there's another large tree here. This one is very close to our viewpoint, which is why it's going to appear taller as well as more detailed. But notice the way that I'm drawing these smaller shapes. I'm drawing them as really tiny marks, and I'm not really trying to connect them with branches or anything. That's because against that light of the sky we won't be able to see some of those smaller, thinner shapes like smaller, thinner branches and twigs and things like that. We're just going to be able to see the groups of foliage which stand out against that lighter value of the sky, which is why I'm using tiny marks that almost look like dots or groups of dots to create the appearance of that foliage on a tree. The only larger darker shapes which are kind of uninterrupted are the shapes of the tree trunk and maybe some of the larger branches here and there. And also I don't really care if the shape of my tree isn't exactly as it is in the reference. I just look at the reference to get the general idea. So if the tree ends up looking like the similar type of a tree or the similar shape of the tree, that's great. But if it doesn't, it's also fine, because the general idea is to capture the shape of the slope and the value contrast between the slope and the mountains in the back. So once again, if you look at the reference as well as my drawing now, because now it's starting to become clear what I'm doing, you will see that when we're looking at the slope in the foreground, we're looking at the shadow side of the mountain in the foreground. I'm going to have a lot of these sharp rocks stacked one on top of the other here. So first I'm going to draw the shadow side of them, just to give myself a better idea where they should be. And then I'm going to do some erasing to draw the lighter sides of them, using a combination of an eraser and a brush. So right now I'm playing around with the Tombow Mono Zero eraser to see what kind of shapes and what kind of contrast I can come up with. And I need to have some more of those rocky shapes here as well. Again, I'm not particularly worried about the exact placement of the rocks or the exact shapes of the rocks. I'm just trying to capture the general idea. I'm also putting in some suggestions of clumps of grass here and there, because there is a little bit of grass between the rocky parts. So the slope is covered with grass, rocks and occasional trees. You can see how every now and then I will use a brush to lift up a little bit of charcoal and then clean things up with an eraser additionally. But you can see how I'm always wiping the brush a little bit and then going back in and drawing a lighter shape, and then wiping the brush and then going back in with a clean brush and drawing a lighter shape, And it's very similar to the lifting up technique when you're using watercolor. In watercolor you can actually erase color by using a clean brush, and I'm doing a very similar technique here, but I'm working in dry media obviously, except that I'm using a clean brush and I'm lifting up a little bit of charcoal. So you can see I created a bunch of these lighter shapes without ever touching the paper with an eraser. I will use an eraser a little bit later to maybe add some lighter touches and to clean up some of the edges, but you can already see that I created a bunch of lighter shapes that look like rocks, and I did that using nothing other than a brush, which was just used to lift up a certain amount of charcoal. These shapes are not completely white, nor would I want them to be, but they're a lot lighter. And that's the advantage of vine charcoal. It's so easy to manipulate in terms of the amount of value. It doesn't really stick to the paper, so you can always kind of move it around, lift it up, and create lighter or darker shapes as needed. And of course it works a lot better if you use it in a combination with charcoal pencils, because with charcoal pencils you get darker values, darker shapes that stick more to the surface of the paper, and you also get more texture, and you can use that to create illusions of details, smaller details like grass or smaller rocks, rough terrain and things like that. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. Here and there I'm drawing some shapes of grass, either individual blades of grass or groups or clumps of grass, or even maybe some suggestions of smaller bushes here and there. Doesn't really matter. I'll leave those things to the interpretation or the imagination of the viewer. But as you can see, I was able to create a terrain that looks fairly detailed with actually very little effort. The paper I'm working on also has a nice texture. It's not completely smooth, it has a little bit of a tooth. This is the Fabriano sketching paper, but this time I'm working on a smaller size. Here I felt like modifying the shape of this slope a little bit. I added a few of these jagged rough shapes, and then went on to add some more rocks and stones here on this slope. So as you can see, I'm almost done. I'm finishing these corners here where I had a little bit of tape, and I'm just going to put my signature here in the right corner. And now the drawing is done. I hope you like how this little scene turned out. Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to check out my other videos. For longer videos and full-length videos and more content, check out my Patreon. Bye bye.